The Baltimore Ravens are ready to end the Cincinnati Bengals playoff hopes in their season. We talk about how and so much more coming up on this edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today on this crossover Thursday edition of the show. Game day, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day, free and available for you, all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe, also in audio form, wherever you get your podcast. You can follow along and subscribe over there. 5 days per week, both audio and video. You're not missing out any which way you decide to watch or listen to the show. Today's crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. We return the Ravens. It is game day. Cincinnati Bengals week, Cincinnati Bengals day, Thursday night football. Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. We saw these two teams face off in week 5, and that was a classic 41-38 Ravens win in overtime. Ravens going for the sweep. We know that Lamar Jackson likes playing the Bengals. We know that John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson love playing in primetime. But that Cincinnati Bengals offense with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, etc., Ravens defense are going to have their hands full. So we're going to dive into everything you need to know about the game. We have Jake Liscow and James Rapien of Locked On Bengals, and we're going to dive into the biggest matchups, key storylines, keys to victory, and a lot more. On the Ravens side of things, Isaiah Likely and Brent Urban are out. You have others questionable, but Lamar Jackson and Travis Jones both not on the injury report, so big news for the Ravens there. On the Bengals side, you got T. Higgins, who is doubtful. That's a big blow. If you remember, T. Higgins torched the Ravens alongside Jamar Chase in that week 5 game. So the Ravens, they're 6-3. Bengals are 4-5 with a loss. The Bengals playoff hopes in their season looks pretty dashed. So the Ravens definitely looking to end what Cincinnati has left. So without any further ado, let's get into our crossover Thursday with Jake Liscow and James Rapien. Guys, the Ravens enter this game at 6-3. Cincinnati, they need a win in order to essentially keep their season alive, traveling down to Baltimore. Joe Burrow versus Lamar Jackson. We saw these two teams match up just essentially a couple weeks ago back in week 5. And man, that's game of the year type stuff right there. Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson putting on master classes, but the Ravens come out on top in overtime. So with the Bengals, guys, let's start on the offensive side of the ball. And Jake, I'll throw it to you first here. For the Bengals, what's the biggest storyline on offense? Because Joe Burrow's playing lights out football right now, but there are some injuries on that side of the ball to monitor.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Hit the nail on the head there. Joe Burrow is playing at an MVP level, and I know that Lamar Jackson is the other quarterback in the NFL playing at an MVP level, so not to take anything away from Lamar, but Joe Burrow's right there with him, in my opinion, in the way that he's played, especially coming into form in terms of pocket management, pocket feel on full display against the Las Vegas Raiders. And while the Las Vegas Raiders did beat the Ravens earlier this year, I think we can all agree that they're not a very good football team, and Max Crosby not having necessarily even his best season, despite him being a good player on that Vegas defense. That said, Joe Burrow was excellent in extending plays and making things happen. And he was doing that without left tackle Orlando Brown, who missed a game, which is generally unheard of, as Ravens fans are probably familiar with, for the very durable left tackle for the Bengals. T. Higgins, doubtful this week for the second straight week. So they're going to be shorthanded. Eric All now on IR with an ACL injury, Zach Moss with a neck injury that's landed him on IR out indefinitely. So that's 4 pretty important players for this Bengals offense that have some sort of status. Orlando Brown is questionable this week. With all that going on around him, though, Joe Burrow is still playing at that very high level. And if that can continue, then the offense can keep doing what it's doing. But I do think that it gets harder against the Ravens defense, despite the issues they've had all year. And I do think the Bengals will be able to pass the ball, probably, just given the way these teams played last time, the way the season's gone for each team. But that's definitely harder and requires guys to step up. All eyes on Jermaine Burton. Can he bounce back after a healthy scratch last week and disciplinary issues instead of T. Higgins? Can they get something going for Jamar Chase when there's going to be a ton of attention paid there? That challenge is there, but when you have Joe Burrow playing at this level, that is still an encouraging sign for this offense going forward despite the injuries.
Yeah, and injuries are a tough part of the game in Cincinnati, dealing with them on the offensive side of the ball. And I know, James, for the offense, obviously we know what Joe Burrow has done, Jamar Chase, but the running game, I think, is something for Cincinnati that a lot of people are wondering. With Chase Brown now the guy, the Bengals bring in Khalil Herbert. How important is it for them to establish this ground game against the Ravens defense that's been pretty stout against the run this season?
Yeah, I think they need to be the two E's, efficient and explosive. Can you steal two explosive runs on Thursday night? Because that would be great if you could, whether it's Chase Brown or Khalil Herbert. And efficiency is certainly the key. Just being able to get Joe Burrow in 2nd and 6, or maybe Khalil Herbert, who's been good in short yardage situations throughout his career. Maybe he helps them on 3rd and 1 when they need it. And they've struggled in those situations at times. Even though Joe's been awesome on 3rd down, they haven't necessarily been great in 3rd and short situations. So I do think that the run game is important. I don't expect them to run the ball a ton. I don't, because I'm not sure they're going to be able to. To your point, the Ravens are good against the run. You have Joe Burrow. It's a pass-first Bengals offense against a Ravens defense that has been susceptible to the pass. But if they can be efficient, if you're telling me that they're averaging 4.1 to 4.3 a carry, I would sign up for that right now, even if it meant no explosive runs. Maybe my expectations are low or my barometer is low, but I'm not going into this game thinking, all right, no Zach Moss, who's a valuable piece of their backfield, Khalil Herbert, who's going to take the field. I do expect him to play. We'll see if he actually does. But having like 40 hours in the Bengals system, it's not like he's going to be have the expanded playbook there. And then Chase Brown, who's a really good player and is going to start for them, and I think is ascending. But I'm not sure this offensive line is built to go manhandle the Ravens in Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore, one of the top rush defenses in the league, and the Bengals right now 24th in terms of yards per attempt on the ground. But let's flip it over to defense, guys, because this Cincinnati defense, despite how high-powered the offense has been this season, the defense has certainly struggled at times. And in this first matchup between the Bengals and the Ravens, both defenses struggled to contain both quarterbacks. And I know for the Cincinnati defense, it was tough to contain Lamar Jackson. So what is the biggest storyline on the defensive side of the ball for the Bengals as they look to try to combat this high-powered Baltimore offense?
Well, they didn't make a trade at the deadline. They didn't add any help there. We were hoping they would. Maybe the trade partners just didn't emerge. There were a few edge rushers traded in the weeks leading up to, and on the trade deadline day itself, the Bengals were not one of the teams that acquired a piece there. The Ravens offense, meanwhile, continues to click on all cylinders. They score 41 against the Bengals, but that's in a streak of games where they go 28, 35, 41, 30, 41, 24, 41, 24 being the low mark there on the road in Cleveland in the Jameis Winston game, or his first game, the Jameis Winston bump, I guess you could call it, for the Cleveland Browns that week. Point is that the Ravens offense continues to click. The Bengals defense has been able to show up against the bad teams in the NFL. And it's truly some of the worst teams in the NFL where the defense has played okay. Against the Ravens, they couldn't get stops, and they didn't add a player to help them get those stops. So this week, it's like, okay, can Myles Murphy take advantage of a matchup with Roger Rosengarten on the right side of that Bengals offense? And even when they got pressure the last time these teams played, as you point out, Kevin, they couldn't get Lamar to the ground. And that was such a big issue. They generally did a pretty good job until overtime against that Ravens running game, in my opinion. Derrick Henry rips off a 51-yard run in overtime to take a stat line from 14 for 40 to 15 for 90. So that's a big difference in the game, right? But they generally did a pretty good job against the run there at the expense of not being able to handle the pass and not being able to string plays together and really having to gamble. So can they be more consistent this week against Baltimore? Can they get Lamar to the ground when they get pressure there? Those are the big questions, the big stories after they didn't do anything to help a defense that, in our opinion, on Locked On Bengals, clearly needed some help at the deadline.
Yeah, and James, I have to ask this about the star of that Bengals defense. How do you stop Trey Hendrickson? I mean, just how do you do it? 4 sacks against the Raiders last week. He is such a dominant force. I know a lot of people are looking forward to any and all snaps that Ronnie Stanley and Trey Hendrickson go up against each other. That's like the battle of the Titans over there. How important is he to this Bengals defense, and what does he do to the ceiling and the floor of what they do?
Yeah, when he's playing at an elite level, and they need him to. You want to talk about a key to every game, but certainly on the road, you talk about disrupting Lamar Jackson. They need Trey Hendrickson to be that guy, and he he's so dominant at times, and there's been other games where you don't necessarily notice 91. And I think that's because he is going to command attention, and he is really the lone guy that has been able to consistently get pressure this year. And so stopping him, well, I hope John Harbaugh is listening, because I'm not sure you can necessarily stop him when he's dialed in and playing at the level that we've seen. The Raiders let him pad his stats a little bit with their injuries. That helped for sure. But he's got to play at a really, really high level, and we know how talented he is. But just defensive line wise, can someone help him? That's what I'm looking for. Sheldon Rankins was signed for a reason, and our listeners certainly are aware of this. We haven't really noticed 98 all year, and so Thursday night would be a good time for 98 to help 91. They were teammates back in New Orleans. It would be nice to see a Sheldon Rankins sighting where he's able to get some pressure on Lamar Jackson. I think that's a huge, huge key and storyline going into Thursday's game.
Lots of Bengals storylines to look out for. And when we come back here on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bengals, we'll be flipping it over to the Ravens side of things. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bengals. First, the show is brought to you by Zbiotics. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Zbiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by a PhD scientist to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. And so here's how it works, and here's how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to Zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to Zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off.
Let's talk about those Baltimore Ravens, Kevin. Obviously, the offense has stayed hot and has been the unit carrying that team this year. The addition of Derrick Henry has that run game going on all cylinders, but Lamar Jackson's ability as a passer has really stood out this year and has elevated. Not that he was a bad passer before, but compared to his MVP season, I think most would agree that he's playing better football this year. What is the biggest story right now for that Baltimore Ravens offense that is riding another elite year from Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, I think the word is kind of history for this Ravens offense. We were sitting here after the 2019 season and kind of wondering, after that historic season, were we ever going to see another Ravens offense that put up those type of numbers and was on that historic pace? And here we are 5 years later talking about that. Even Lamar Jackson last year during his MVP season, that was the best we had ever seen him. And all of a sudden we're sitting here in 2024 and you have seen the evolution and the growth. The game has just slowed down for him so much as a player. And he's a very low mistake player, does not turn the ball over. Both of his interceptions this season have come off of dropped or tipped up balls by receivers. And for what Lamar does, he calls it the pick your poison type of offense. That's kind of the phrase that he and the team has coined, because when teams do decide to stack the box to try to stop the run game, get a good jump on a Derrick Henry run and stop him in the backfield, Lamar in this Ravens offense, they work play action off of that. They can blop the ball over the linebackers, and one-on-one, these receivers are really good route runners and really good separators. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, they just got Deontay Johnson. And so those guys can all make an impact there. But then when you have to take those guys back out of the box and maybe, play too high or whatever you want to do and try to force the Ravens to run the ball, you don't want to force the Ravens to run the ball ever. That's just not a good winning formula. But when you do, you have to account for both the run game and the pass game because of all of the different looks that the Ravens can give you. So for this offense, I think if you're looking at an area that maybe is a little concern point, even though they've played a lot better since the start of the season, the offensive line has had some ups and downs this season, but generally I've been pretty impressed. Obviously, we talked about Ronnie Stanley versus Trey Hendrickson in the first part of the show. He's had a rejuvenated year this year. Tyler Linderbaum continues to be one of the best centers in the league, and they're getting contributions from guys like Patrick McCary, Roger Rosengarten, who we mentioned as well, and even Daniel Falele. So this offense has so many ways that it can beat defenses, and we saw them put up 40 points on the best defense in the league last week in the Denver Broncos, when a lot of people were maybe expecting that Denver defense to stifle Lamar Jackson. He went out there, went 16 of 19, 280 yards, and had a perfect passer rating for the fourth time in his career, which tied only Ben Roethlisberger and is better than obviously the greats, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, whoever else you want to name in that conversation.
You mentioned Deontay Johnson, and I think that's kind of an interesting storyline. Isaiah Likely's out. Deontay Johnson now a short week, but still a few extra days in the Ravens system. He had 83 yards and a touchdown as a member of the Carolina Panthers against this Bengals secondary earlier this year. Do you expect him to have a significant role on Thursday night, or an increased role, especially with Likely out?
Yeah, I think increase is probably the word I would use. I'm not sure he'll ever have a significant role unless there's an injury. I know that for the Ravens, they didn't bring him in to necessarily challenge Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman for their snaps, but you feel a lot better with him as your number 3 than you do Nelson Aguilar, who I think makes a much better 4 than a 3. But with Isaiah Likely out, obviously you can still run 2 tight end sets with Charlie Kohler replacing Isaiah Likely. Obviously, when you start to get into your 3, I don't think they're going to call somebody up. I just think they're going to try to use Deontay Johnson a little bit more. We didn't see him a lot in that game last week. Obviously, he's just getting acclimated to the system. But for him, I think the big thing with this receiving offense this season, I know we talked about this the first time we talked for Crossover Thursday back in week 5, Lamar Jackson is spreading the ball around a lot more this season, and that has continued to be the trend, where it's not just Mark Andrews gets 10 targets a game, Zay Flowers gets 7, and the rest get 1. You're getting everybody involved. And so for Deontay Johnson, he could get, 2 to 3 targets in this game, especially with Isaiah Likely out, who they like to line up all over the place. And we even see them try to run tight end, little screen passes to him and little trickeration plays. So Todd Monken at times can get a little too cute with this offense, as we saw, I think, in that Cleveland loss where you have Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, you don't use them. But for Deontay Johnson, I think if you use him effectively, especially against the Cincinnati pass defense, I'm not expecting him to go out there and catch 10 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown, but he could make a couple of big first down catches, especially with his separation ability.
There will be a challenge there, of course, for the Bengals secondary to deal with a shifty and, as you said, Kevin, quality separating wide receiver group from the Baltimore Ravens. And, of course, Charlie Kohler, who went for 3 and 64 and a touchdown the last time these teams played. But despite that tongue-in-cheek comment, these quarterbacks playing at an extremely high level, that will be a fun duel to watch. Both players with 20 touchdowns, both players, according to Pro Football Focus, with just 4 turnover-worthy plays each, within a percentage point of each other in turnover-worthy throw percentage. All that being said, and all the attention on the quarterbacks and the offenses in this game, what's going on with that defense? Are we seeing the attrition that I prognosticated about when we did our division preview in the preseason, where the brain drain of the coaching staff is being felt, or how are you diagnosing what's going on with the Ravens defense this year?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of everything. I think losing Mike McDonald, and you lose Denard Wilson, who's now in Tennessee, Anthony Weaver, who's now in Miami. It was a lot of coaches to lose at one time. And while the Ravens went internal with Zach Orr and they kept generally the same system, obviously with some wrinkles and changes in there, it was always going to be an adjustment period for a coach who had never called plays at any level before. College, high school, pros, never. So some of the schematic things we've seen have been a little concerning, sometimes. And it's some of the stuff we see where a coordinator will play his guys off as opposed to playing them up at the line, and that will result. This is sometimes situational play calling. But for the most part, you have the players coming out, and obviously, this is what they are going to do. They defended their coordinator. Marlon Humphrey said it, it's really disheartening to see Zach Orr get all this blame when it's the players not executing. And the players certainly haven't executed the way that they've needed to this season. And that Cleveland loss, 5 dropped interceptions in that game. They have been by far the leading team in dropped interceptions this season. The pass rush has not been good. And, I know you guys talked about the Bengals, maybe, was there a pass rusher or a guy on the line that they could have brought in? Well, the Ravens were kind of, the clear need was pass rusher, because since the Lions lost Aiden Hutchinson a couple weeks ago, the Ravens have the worst pass rush win rate in the entire league, 23%. So they're not getting to the quarterback. Quarterbacks are having time to stand in there, go through their reads. And this is against guys like Jameis Winston and Bo Nix. That's not Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is way up here compared to those guys. You do not want to give Joe Burrow that amount of time to throw the football. He will dice you up, much like we saw in that Week 5 game. Both Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow diced their opposing defense up. So the big storyline has to be, can the pass rush bounce back? They've missed Travis Jones on the interior these past couple of weeks. He's been hindered by an ankle injury and really hasn't looked like himself. He's not on the injury report for this game. So hopefully for Baltimore side of things, a good sign that maybe they can get him back. But it's other players like Kyle Van Noy who had a strong start to the season. He's been a little inconsistent. And Afe always been inconsistent. Nnamdi Madubuike, their $100 million man, he's been inconsistent. Guys have to step up because trade deadline's over. No one else is coming through that door to help you unless a miracle. Maybe Miami cuts Calais Campbell and Baltimore and Cincinnati can get to a little bidding war for his services coming up.
Yeah, I think everyone listening is dreaming of that. Dreaming of
Literally.
that scenario right now. Yeah. We talked about Campbell probably 10 times in the offseason, maybe more than that. And he ended up signing with Miami, Kevin, just to give you an idea of what that was like.
A little bit of an allusion there to some of the matchups I think we will both be talking about when we talk about keys to victory here. I think we're both looking at the trenches. We're both looking at the ability to disrupt passing games for these teams that have been really good in the passing game. Let's transition to the keys to victory for each team in this game to finish this crossover Thursday next.
First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get 100 in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats for live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You're going to start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And this show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to 100 times your cash. Earn your game all season long on Prize Picks. I love going on Prize Picks, seeing everything they have to offer. They have so much over there, and you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds to turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. So for the Ravens and Bengals game, maybe you like Lamar Jackson more on the passing yards, Joe Burrow more on the passing yards. That'd be probably a pretty good thing to go with over on Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Back here on Crossover Thursday, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Bengals. Kevin's still here with Jake and James breaking down everything you need to know for the big Thursday night matchup. Just a reminder that this Crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bengals is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Guys, there are a lot of things that both these teams can do to win the game. Big primetime matchup. Both teams need a win. Although I'd say Cincinnati needs just a little more than the Ravens do at this stage. But I'll throw it to you guys first. For the Ravens and the Bengals matchup, what do the Bengals have to do to come out on top?
James, I'll start with 1, and I'll let you fill in 2 and 3. To me, it starts with the game in the trenches. I alluded to this just a couple minutes ago. The game in the trenches, disrupting that passing game, whether it leads to a big interception, which was a huge part of the difference in the last time these teams met, or just getting off the field in a game where it might be hard for defenses to get off the field if you can get teams behind the chains. That's where I'm starting. Is it the pass rush, getting these quarterbacks on the ground, which these teams did not do a good job of the last time they played, especially on the Bengals side of the ball from my perspective. And you mentioned, Kevin, the Ravens have been struggling with a bit lately. Turnovers, sacks, those kind of sudden change, big swings. That's the start of the list for me, James. Where are you looking beyond those 2 points?
The path for the Bengals to win begins and ends with the first or second best player on the field, however you want to say it. I'm not trying to make people mad, but it's Joe Burrow. And you mentioned his pocket movement earlier in the show. They need Joe Burrow to be the best player on the field Thursday night to have a realistic shot of winning the game. And so I think of their path to doing it And yeah, the trenches certainly would help. It would be nice if Burrow just had a clean pocket and that Ravens pass rush didn't get there, like Kevin mentioned, and they've had issues doing. But we've seen him step up. We've seen him move around. We saw him deal with Max Crosby and not get sacked by Crosby last week. And so he needs to be playing at that just elite level. And they need Ja'Marr Chase to do that as well. I think it sounds obvious and simple, but guess what? The Ravens have prepared 4 straight days to take those guys down just a peg, because if so, then I'm not sure the Bengals can win this game. They need Burrow to be an MVP and play like an MVP on Thursday night. They need Chase to show everyone he's the best player or the best receiver rather in the league. And I'm not saying he is, but at the end of Thursday night, if the Bengals win, I think it would be because Ja'Marr has a 200-yard game or 150-yard game and is just uncoverable, much like the Week 5 matchup where Burrow and Chase tried to put their team on the back, the Bengals on their back, got close to it. And obviously they blew multiple 10-point leads in a weird, wacky fourth quarter and overtime. So that's one. Trench is obviously another one. And then, of course, it's Derrick Henry, because that's the nightmare scenario. You could say, get the Lamar Jackson, but if Derrick Henry's running and he has a couple of explosive runs, then good luck, because then it's going to open up everything for Lamar even more. The Bengals have done a good job with Henry. Can that continue? I wonder. So those, I think, are the three. We're in lockstep there, Jake.
Yeah, I'll just throw in one ancillary piece, which is playmakers outside of Ja'Marr Chase. Do they find those answers? I alluded to it in our first segment. The Bengals have a lot of injuries right now on offense, including 3 playmakers in Zach Moss, T. Higgins, and Eric All. And you might see a shift in that offense this week. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. They've been a 12 personnel dominant offense lately with Eric All and another tight end taking a lot of snaps, and they lose that versatility a little bit with Eric All's injury this week. So we'll see how that shifts in a short week. Kevin, from the Baltimore side of things, how do you see these keys working out?
Yeah, ours kind of go hand in hand with each other, because the first one to me is make anyone but Ja'Marr Chase beat you on that offensive side of the ball. And we kind of had talked something similar about that in Week 5. And then Ja'Marr obviously goes off against that Baltimore pass defense. But I think the key in this game is going to be there's no T. Higgins. And T. Higgins was a guy that torched the Ravens in that Week 5 matchup too. Now, it wasn't only Ja'Marr Chase that did it. T did it as well. So, if you let Yoshi go out there and do his thing, you live with a guy like that doing that, because you know that it's not a Ja'Marr Chase. I think you throw everything you have at Ja'Marr and you make somebody else beat you. If it's the Mike Gesicki show, okay. I think you live with that if you're the Ravens. But if you let Ja'Marr go out there and do what he does, and look, there's a possibility he does, because Jamar's just that good. And I don't think there's really but you're not going to hold them, although Brandon Stevens did a decent job last season. I think that's probably as close as you're going to get to maybe shutting down a Ja'Marr Chase. But this isn't the same pass defense that the Ravens had last year into this season. So Ja'Marr Chase getting stopped is number one. Make someone else beat you. Number two is, for this Ravens team, that second half, they were down by 10 the majority of the game. They came back, obviously sent it to overtime and won the game. I'd love it if they were to get out to a fast start. I think something along the lines of a 14-3, 10-0 lead. Now, is that enough to hold Joe Burrow back? Obviously, no. Joe Burrow can come back from those types of deficits and win games, much like we saw Lamar Jackson do against the Bengals. But I just think it increases the likelihood that the Ravens would win the game, because I think that obviously if you can establish a ground game early, get out to an early lead, it just flows into what the Ravens want to do on that side of the ball. But the thing is, the Ravens want to run and pass. They can do both. Lamar only had 3 carries in the game last week, and part of that's because the Ravens were just dicing up this Denver pass defense left and right. Lamar didn't really need to use his legs. When he has to, he does, but he can sit back in that pocket and just do his thing. And finally, I think for the Ravens offense, it doesn't really matter how Cincinnati's defense attacks Lamar. It's going to be difficult to stop him either which way, but I think being able to handle the blitz and make sure that if something like that happens where Trey Hendrickson gets to Lamar, it's going to be on Lamar. Obviously, he does such a great job of breaking outside, escaping the pocket, and making things happen. I think you have to hit on those plays. Usually the Ravens do that, but there have been some games where it looks just a tad disoriented. But if the Bengals bring the blitz, or Trey Hendrickson wins one-on-one, or someone else steps up and gets to Lamar, we saw a play early in that Denver game. The Broncos rushed 3 guys on the third down, and Lamar just kind of like backpedaled into the sack and knocked the Ravens out of field goal range. I don't think he can afford something like that against the Bengals offense, where I think you'll have opportunities against that defense to score, but you have to take advantage of them for the most part, because we know Joe Burrow and that offense can put up points in a hurry. So that to me is where I'm going with keys to victory on the Ravens side of things. But this game's going to be really good. I expect it to be one of those vintage AFC North matchups. Who knows if it'll live up to the Week 5 game, guys, but I'm expecting fireworks nonetheless on both sides of the ball. Jake and James with some great Bengals insight. Going to probably be a really good game between these two teams. I don't know if it'll live up to the Week 5 game. That was an absolute classic. But again, AFC North, always a crazy game on deck for the most part. And I'm excited because both teams do need this win. The Ravens at 6-3, 4 AFC losses, not good. Bengals at 4-5. They need this win to keep their season alive. So I'm going to go with the Ravens here. I think Baltimore wins. I think the loss of T. Higgins is going to be really big for the Bengals. And I think this will be a bounce back game for both the pass rush and for the defense in general. Just as a reminder, we will be live after the Ravens and Bengals game tonight. So be sure to tune in to that. We'll do an instant reaction show. And then obviously after that, we'll be back on Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time, breaking it down even more. So that's all I have for you here today on the show. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on the way out on YouTube and on the way out in audio form. Be sure to follow along and subscribe over there as well. Again, coming up, we'll be going live after the game. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.